Good day, friends, and welcome to a conversation that we're going to be having around the book of Ruth. And I'm joined today by Reverend Marilyn and Reverend Annette, who are going to be part of the conversation. And thank you to everyone who's been joining with us and making comments on Facebook, or those who've received the videos on WhatsApp and have interacted with some of the material we've sent out. And we hope that the study of Ruth is in some way just piqued your interest around some of the Old Testament stories, and hopefully piqued your interest a little bit around the story of Ruth, which carries a number of themes. And like any good story, it has many, many layers. There's something in the fact that Jesus shared stories. I think there's something significant that Jesus chose stories as his primary way of telling people about God's activity in our lives and God's activity in the world, because sometimes stories can say what a teaching or a simple phrase cannot. Somehow they go deeper. And so this is one of those stories that explores some very complicated things, and it invites us to find ourselves in the midst of the story. And that's what we're going to try and continue doing. So I've got Reverend Annette and I've got Reverend Marilyn here. And what I'm just going to do is begin by reading a little bit of the third chapter of Ruth, which is where we're moving to. But we're going to be carrying on by looking back at some of the ground that we've taken in chapter 2, and we're going to look forward to the way in which God's plan unfolds through the human characters in the story. So just taking a look at Ruth chapter 3. One day Ruth's mother-in-law Naomi said to her, "My daughter, I must find a home for you where you will be well provided for. Now Boaz, with whose woman you have worked, is a relative of ours. Tonight he will be winnowing barley on the threshing floor. Wash, put on perfume, and get dressed in your best clothes. Then go down to the threshing floor, but don't let him know you are there until he has finished eating and drinking. When he lies down, note the place he is lying. Then go and uncover his feet and lie down. He will tell you what to do." "I will do whatever you say," Ruth answered. So she went down to the threshing floor and did what her mother-in-law told her to do. When Boaz had finished eating and drinking and was in good spirits, he went over to lie down at the far end of the grain pile. Ruth approached quietly, uncovered his feet, and lay down. In the middle of the night, something startled the man. He turned, and there was a woman lying at his feet. "Who are you?" he asked. "I am your servant Ruth," she said. "Spread the corner of your garment over me, since you are a guardian redeemer of our family." "The Lord bless you, my daughter," he replied. "This kindness is greater than that which you showed earlier. You have not run after younger men, whether rich or poor. And now, my daughter, don't be afraid. I will do for you all that you ask. All the people of my town that know that you are a woman of noble character. Although it is true that I am a guardian redeemer of our family, there is another who is more closely related than I. Stay for the night, and in the morning, if he wants you to do his duty as your guardian redeemer, good, let him redeem you. But if he is not willing, as surely as the Lord lives, I will do it. Lie here until morning." She lay at his feet until morning, but got up before anyone could be recognized. And he said, "No one must know that a woman came to the threshing floor." He also said, "Bring me the shawl you are wearing and hold it out." When she did so, he poured into it 6 measures of barley and placed the bundle on her. Then he went back to town. When Ruth came to her mother-in-law, Naomi asked, "How did it go, my daughter?" Then she told her everything that he had done for her, and added, "He gave me these 6 measures of barley, saying, 'Don't go back to your mother-in-law empty-handed.'" Then Naomi said, "Wait, my daughter, until you find out what happens, for the man will not rest until the matter is settled today." And we give thanks for these words of life as they come to us through the scriptures. So one of the questions that I wanted us to look at was simply the question, why is it important that we hear this story, particularly as it's one of the few stories in the Old Testament which is really told from the perspective of the woman in the story? Most of the stories in the Old Testament, the women's stories that intertwine with the men's stories are very briefly mentioned, and we sometimes have to just sort of read between the lines to figure out what might have been their response, their feelings, their way of approaching what was happening in their lives. We don't get the detail filled in for us, but in Ruth we get the detail. And I wonder why it's significant, perhaps, that we do particularly hear stories from the perspective of women, and how these look different to the men's stories we find in the Old Testament. So I'm throwing out a bit of a big question, but I don't know, Lynette or Marilyn, who wants to pick that one up?
Well, I think first of all that it's a beautiful story, and women can identify with it. I think that's one of the things I would say. And from the whole story, there's just this wonderful sense of a woman of faith who is trying her best to be of service and help to others. So it's not a selfish story. It's a story of her just doing what she believes she should do. Yes, I don't want to get into too many of the details of the story, but certainly from the perspective of a woman, it's just great to have a story like this. Because after all, Genesis says that we were created in the image of God, just as men were. So to actually have a story like this in the scriptures just helps women to realize that, we're not second-class citizens after all.
Thank you. Marilyn, I don't know if you've got anything to add from your side.
I think for me, one of the commentaries that I was looking at was speaking about how, in a sense, women were property in those days.
Yes.
And I think just, what Lynette was saying too, that there's a story about a woman not as property, but a story as who she is. And, when you think that the odds were actually against her, I mean, she was a foreigner, she was a widow, she was childless, but she had gone with Naomi and this faith. And I think it speaks to us of sometimes we do feel like possession, sometimes we do feel like the odds are against us, but there's a story here of this woman who fights the odds and wins, if I can put it like that. Yeah.
And of course, some will read the story through different lenses. And, some people, particularly this chapter that I've read, will kind of probably look at sort of Naomi almost encouraging Ruth to seduce Boaz into marriage as a little bit problematic. But I think one of the things certainly that stood out for me was the fact that in spite of this, Ruth's not like a passive pawn in the story. Obviously, her choices in the society she lives are very limited, but she takes what action she needs to take, not just to secure herself, but to secure Naomi's future together with hers. And certainly she approaches Boaz as a person who doesn't see herself as a non-person. She's definitely an active agent in her own story. And I think that's just what stood out for me as I was reading it first.
In some ways, one would say she's quite sneaky, but on the other hand, she's an intelligent woman. She realizes that she's not going to be there forever. That the day will come when Ruth is on her own.
Yes.
So she does everything that she can because she loves her so much. She does everything she can in order to secure her future.
Yeah.
And so my understanding is that this whole matter of going to go and lie at his feet was, in a sense, a kind of a cultural thing. But what amused me is that it was a kind of it was a proposal.
Yeah.
Um,
I'm available.
Pardon?
I'm available.
Exactly.
Yeah. And in a sense, I think what I'm hearing also is that in a way the characters sort of redeem each other in the story. And I think that's also what's been beautiful for me, the way in which all of the characters use what they have in their hands to redeem one another. I think as Lynette rightly pointed out, you know, Naomi uses her understanding of Israelite culture to basically guide Ruth and to secure her future. Ruth uses her access to Boaz to secure Naomi's future. She doesn't just look for herself. Boaz actually defers to Ruth, and he doesn't take advantage of her vulnerability, but he rather sees it, and he uses his position to redeem both Ruth and Boaz. There's a way in which...
If I could just say, coming back to what I said just now about, you know, women being seen as property, I don't think he saw her as property. I think he saw her as Ruth. I think it gives indication in one of the commentaries that I'd read that it gives indication that he had heard of Ruth. So, you know, probably the local skinner in the town was, oh, Naomi's back with her daughter-in-law, and so, you know, the gossip, or should I say the word of mouth spread. So he'd obviously heard about her, and he'd heard about her integrity, her consistency, her love for Naomi, the fact that she leaves behind her own family to come into a foreign place and to worship this God of Naomi's. So he's obviously heard about all of that. And so he sees her not as an it, but as a who. And I think that for me really, really speaks that, you know, that this story speaks about seeing the wholeness and the beauty and the who of a person, your personhood, you know, that he sees this.
Yeah, it's amazing too that Boaz also says that, you know, I'm not the first in line for this.
Yeah.
So he's not wanting to take advantage of her.
Yeah.
Although it does appear that he is quite fond of her right from the beginning when he first met her.
Yeah.
As she came to glean with the servant girls, he seemed to have been quite impressed with the person that she was. And because he had heard the stories of her own sacrifice of coming into a foreign country, he's drawn to her. But he is not wanting to possess her, as you quite correctly say, because, as he says, you know, there is someone else who's a closer relative, and so it's actually his first option. So he has a proposal, and he wants to say yes, I'll marry you, but at the same time he's saying, I just have got to do this the right way because of our traditions. And so I'm willing to be your kinsman redeemer in all that entails. And so, well, chapter 4 will tell us how he goes about that. But he's not wanting to just say, oh, yay, she's now proposed, I'm going to take her. But he is considerate of the fact that he's got to follow the protocols.
And I think what stands out for me as well is just also throughout the book of Ruth, how each of the characters almost goes beyond what's expected of them. It's, you know, Naomi almost lets Ruth off the hook, you know, with Orpah. She says, go, you don't owe me anything at this point. Go be with your people. Ruth makes a choice, and it's a choice she makes, you know, to go beyond what's expected of her and to stay with Naomi. Naomi goes almost beyond what's expected of her to sort of secure Ruth for the future. And Boaz goes beyond, the kinsman redeemer didn't have to necessarily enter into marriage with Ruth in the way that the story will unfold. And I think there's something about it that I think I pointed out in the introduction that the book of Ruth was always read in the Jewish tradition at the Festival of Weeks, when there was celebration, was the giving of the law on Sinai. And the idea for me that sort of stood out was that the law isn't meant to just be a set of regulations that we follow, and if we can find a loophole to get out of one, we take the gap we can find to dodge it. It's really meant to point us in a direction, and each of these is willing to go beyond what the law would have required of them, just to. And it raised an important question for me, and I came across it just before our conversation now, and it was the title of a book. It says, "What do we owe to each other? What do we owe to each other?" And in a sense, this story tells us so much about three characters who really didn't owe each other anything, but chose to give.
Very much so.
So the question I wanted to throw out as well is, what ways do we see each of these characters participating in God's work of redemption, and how do we, through our own actions, help to allow God's work to take place? Because the story's set in very ordinary moments. It's all about food and fellowship, really, food and friendship, food and family. How do we see God's work in the day-to-day stuff of our lives, and how do we participate in it?
Well, certainly, it seems that for Naomi, her past was not going to be the final destination. And so she is looking to the future, and yeah, in that way, helping Ruth. I'm not quite sure that I'm answering your question, but won't you just...
Yeah, I was just thinking how Ruth makes us think about the twists and turns in our own lives, and how we respond to them. And there's also the sense in which our faith can not only give us refuge, but it can also give us boldness to step out and create the future with God.
Well, quite obviously, in the beginning part of the story, Naomi is quite happy to be perfectly honest about how she sees what God has been doing in her life. They share their grief, but yet she's willing to live in the reality of that relationship, of being able to say to Ruth, I don't understand this, but I'm going to continue trusting.
Yeah. Thank you. And I think that's a very important moment you pick up on. And I think I know Dave picked up on his reflection, but also that importance of Naomi shows us she's able to say exactly what she feels in relation to God. She says, the Lord's hand's against me and I'm bitter.
Yeah. That's probably what helps Ruth accept this God that Naomi speaks about. This is real, and she's not just soft soaking the whole situation, or saying that it's going to turn out okay or anything like that. She feels the reality of the loss of her husband, and the reality of the loss of her sons. And because she's honest about her faith and how she's feeling about God, I believe that Ruth is more especially attracted to her. And I think that says something to us, that, as Christians, we can give such glib answers at times.
Yeah.
And it's okay to say, I'm struggling. Like in the
Yeah.
situation that we're in at the moment with the coronavirus. It's okay to say that. And yet at the same time, to hold on to our faith and trust in God.
Mm.
I think for me it's learning this. I don't know. I don't want to call it a skill, but learning to be able to separate what we're feeling from the reality.
Yeah.
You know, so to acknowledge, you can't change how you feel. I think, you know, when people glibly say you mustn't feel like that, I want to have apoplexy, because you can't change how you feel.
Yes.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, if you're feeling miserable, you're feeling miserable. But I think when you can acknowledge that that's how I'm feeling, but we realize that it's not, you know, we don't stay in that feeling. We have a choice. Whereas we can moan and you know, doom and gloom, but we have a choice to say, okay, that's how I'm feeling, but this is what I choose to do with the feeling.
Yes.
You know, and I think for me, that's so pertinent. And, you know, in my own life, and I think in Naomi's life, Ruth's life, you know, it's a case of this is how I feel, but actually I can't just sit here. I have to be proactive. I have to do something. You know, even if it is just speaking to a friend and being able to say, you know, just not a good day for me today, but tomorrow will be better, you know. Yeah.
Wow. And I think you raise a really good point there that, and we find in the Psalms too, in fact, all the way through the Old Testament, that faith isn't, it's kind of like not either or, it's both and. It's
Absolutely.
not, you know, I'm either angry and upset and disillusioned, or I have faith. It's, I can be angry, disillusioned, and upset and have faith at the same time.
Absolutely.
The two don't cancel each other out.
Yeah. Now, I think you get some theologies that say, or, you know, folk that say, you know, but if you're a Christian, you know, then you should be on top of the world, you know. Hello, you know. I don't think so. As you have rightly said, and as we've been saying, it's okay to actually feel miserable. I mean, if I think of Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane, when, you know, I don't think when his friends went to sleep, when he asked them to pray, and he was going through some of the most difficult periods of his life, that he came back, and when he saw them sleeping, he was like, okay. I'm sure he wanted to give them a tight clap, you know. But yeah, I think it's being able to be honest, and as we were talking about Naomi being real, and I think that's what people are looking for, is people who are real and not just you know. Yeah.
And I think it's one of the reasons why I can't let go of the scriptures, why I honestly believe this is the way God speaks to us. It's not because everything's sewn up and perfect, and it's because the people who wrote the Old Testament weren't afraid of the nasty stuff and the nasty feelings and the ways in which sometimes, you know, the very people who were serving God got it hopelessly wrong, and they were quite happy to tell that story too, because faith lives in not just the moments of success and when we're feeling like we've got it all together. Faith lives in the moments when we don't know and we're not sure and we're angry and feeling, but God's not scared of all of that.
I think also this whole thing with Naomi and Ruth speaks of a very deep, real, honest, open relationship. You know, and the underlining for me is the word relationship, you know, that it was a real relationship.
Sorry, Lynette, you're going to say something.
Sorry, Lynette, yeah.
I'm trying to remember what I was going to say. I think I was going to say that I think that the value of accepting that there are going to be times of trial and tribulation, but there are also going to be times of great joy and absolute amazement at what God can do. I think that we learn our lessons more when we are at the bottom of the pit, as it were, than when we're on cloud nine. And it's not just a matter of learning lessons, it's a matter of growing in our faith. Because into the future, we can then turn back and say, you know, this is what was happening to me then, and this is what God did. So the problems that I'm facing now can also be redeemed by the Lord.
Amen.
We can use whatever situation in order to grow my faith and make me a better person, and also be able to help others. Because once we have been, you know, it's all very well saying, you know, so often what we say is that I know how you feel, when in actual fact we haven't a clue of how other people feel. But what we can say is, you know, I hear the pain that you're going through. I understand. I can't fully understand because I'm not in your shoes. But this I do know, that God can use that, and then we begin to minister to one another.
That's also a really helpful thought. And I think, you know, the book of Ruth is all about, you know, three people who are vulnerable in their own ways, helping one another in the way they can. I mean, Ruth was just as much a widow as Naomi was, but she made a choice to journey with Naomi. The story seems to hint that Boaz has some kind of emptiness in his own life when he blesses Ruth for coming to him and not running after young men or rich and poor. There's a sense in which he is someone who, unspoken, has a sense of emptiness about him. You know, we can imagine he's a little bit older, and it's odd that in Hebrew society he would still be unmarried, you know. And I think, you know, there's a sense in which all of the characters flourish as they help each other.
Yeah.
I think Nick pointed out, and I think that's the one thing we get from the story of Ruth, that we can actually be part of God's work of redemption, God's work of justice for each other, become the agents of it. I don't know if there's any general thoughts that any of you want to share. A parting blow for our people.
I don't know. Yeah. Doing the right thing takes sacrifice.
Yeah.
Doing the right thing takes sacrifice.
And sharing openly builds the intimacy of the relationships. And of course, in the end, when you get to the end of the story and you hear how God used the relationship in the redemptive story of Christ in the end, because Ruth then becomes the great-grandmother of David, and therefore is part of the line of Jesus. So it's quite amazing that a Moabite woman should be one who is chosen to be part of that. And then I don't know whether I'm getting this wrong, but did I read somewhere that Boaz himself had some connection to the prostitute Rahab? Am I wrong? Why have I got that somewhere along the line?
Yeah, wasn't he from the line? His father or something, there was the line from Rahab. Yeah, I also read that.
So God uses the most unlikely people.
Yeah.
Which I think for me gives me comfort. You know, that he uses unlikely people, but it also says to me that he's all inclusive.
Yes.
You know, he doesn't, because you don't do this, because you don't follow like that, because you aren't of the Jew, you know, you're not an Israelite because you're this, because there's none of that. He's totally inclusive. He does not exclude anybody. And I think that for me gives me great comfort to know that God even includes me, you know, that the inclusivity of God, as nutty as a fruitcake as I am, but he includes me, and he's inclusive, you know, of all. It doesn't matter who you are, what you've done, but the inclusivity of God. Oh, amazing. And sorry, the one more thing is that, you know, I believe that's why I'm a Methodist, because the prevenient grace of God, you know, that all through this story, you see that God is one step ahead. He's always one step ahead. And that excites me, and it gives me comfort to know that with whatever I'm suckling with, God is he's one step ahead. He's got it together. So I don't have to get my knickers in a knot because he's got it together. Sorry.
That's wonderful.
He has the big picture.
Yeah, there you go.
That's a wonderful way of putting it. You know, God sees the big picture that's lived out in all these small little realities of our lives, but God's threading it all together. And I think that's a lovely picture. And I think there's a flip side to what Marilyn and Lynette, you have said. The fact that God uses anyone, no matter where they're coming from, no matter how many failures they've had. I mean, David is the good example of that again. It also says to me, and this is the challenging bit, that I don't get let off the hook. It's almost like, you know, I can't use the fact that I don't have it all together, that I've got nothing to offer. You know, that doesn't stop me from having something to give, something to offer, because sometimes it's very easy to let myself off the hook by saying, oh, well, I don't have it all together. I'll just, you know, I'll wait till my life is a little bit more ordered, then I can, you know, sort of put myself out there and sort of, you know, be of service to others. And it's almost like God is saying, well, you know, you don't have to wait for that. Right now, even in the midst of your own messiness, you still have something to offer. You still are part of my work of redeeming and being of service to others. You don't get to use your own messiness to buy out of what I'm calling you to do.
Well, God doesn't create nobodies.
Yeah.
Indeed, Lynette, indeed. Yeah.
So thank you so much for sharing your thoughts. And we offer this to our people just as a conversation. And I know that many of us are missing Bible study the way we knew it. Yeah, be blessed. Thank you, Marilyn. Thank you, Lynette.
Pleasure. Thank you for letting us be part.
Thank you. Shall we say the blessing together? And now may the grace of our Lord Jesus Christ, the love of God, and the fellowship of the Holy Spirit be with us all, now and forevermore. Amen.